Hi there, everyone. It's Russell. Welcome to the Reading Fabricator. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're reading lots of books. And today I'm going to sort of go off the traditional book review path. And I figured I'd do sort of a bit of a retrospective on my reading years, starting about 7 or 8 years ago in 2016 when I really started getting back into reading. There was about like a 8 year period before that where I just did not read at all. And then 2016 kicked off, and I just sort of just got hooked. Like many of you, I got hooked into the idea of this vast array of books, this world of fiction, of non-fiction, of short stories, and it just took off from there. So what I figured I'd do is I'd give a sort of a rundown of my favorite book of each year up till now, and honorable mentions. And so we can sort of picture how my reading trajectory went. Just see the type of books that I've read and what it has amounted to. Now, obviously, those who know me know that I tend to favor the American novels. That's not a biased thing. It's more to do with it just sort of adheres to me. I found it was the first thing I clicked with when I first started reading back in 2016. But I'm sort of trying to move away from that just a little bit more. In fact, I'm planning on doing some Russian books next year, which will be a very daunting task given some of the big ones that are coming up. But you know, I've read quite a bit of Latin American, and in particular, there was about a few weeks or so at the beginning of this year where I was reading some Japanese literature, which there was 3 books in a row there that I read that were all marvelous. One of them, which I'm actually going to probably talk about later on. But yeah, let's get into it. So the first year, 2016, the year that got me into reading, I was reading stuff like, I picked my reading authors based on people I asked in bookshops. Like, well, who's a good one to start with? You know, someone that influenced a lot of authors to today. And Ernest Hemingway, and even some people mentioned Jonathan Franzen as having one of the best books of the 21st century with The Corrections. The Corrections, I think, was one of the first books I ever read. Among the more popular ones, I think I was Marcus Zusak's The Book Thief, which was quite a popular read in high school. I didn't mind that as well, but I've since grown away from that sort of thing. So my runner-up book from 2016, the inaugural year that I started properly reading, is For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway. A few years ago, if you'd asked me a few years ago, I would have said A Farewell to Arms, followed by The Sun Also Rises, followed by The Old Man and the Sea, and then For Whom the Bell Tolls. But I've been doing a lot of research. I've been rereading a lot of passages from it, and I've come to realize, and I'm probably in the minority of this one, I think it's his masterpiece. I think it's his best book. I did a rereading of The Old Man and the Sea, I think, last year. I can't remember. It was either last year or the year before. And I liked it, but it actually fell in my appreciation compared to the first time I read it. I hope it's not the same with the other two. I did reread The Sun Also Rises, and that rose in my estimation. So I'm not quite sure where For Whom the Bell Tolls and A Farewell to Arms will fit into that category. I do maintain probably the middle section of A Farewell to Arms is probably the best thing he's ever written, but as a whole, I'm going to go for Whom the Bell Tolls. That final section, the final taking of the bridge, is marvelous, and I really love the ending. I'm quite a big fan of Hemingway's endings in books. It's a great read, and I do plan on rereading it, despite the fact it's probably his longest book, just behind Islands in the Stream. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't really calculated the page count of it all. But one book in particular beat him out because I moved on from there. So, okay, well, who did Ernest Hemingway influence, and who did William Faulkner influence? And it led to the one, the only Cormac McCarthy. And I sort of went in the deep end a little bit. I sort of read, I'm pretty sure I read No Country for Old Men first, which, you know, is a good starting point. But I went from No Country way in the deep end. I read this beauty, my favorite book of 2016, Blood Meridian, or The Evening Redness in the West. I have not read it in many years, but I still maintain to this day that not only is it possibly one of the, if not the greatest book of the 20th century, it's also probably the most fucking evil book I've ever read in my life. There are parts in this book that have drilled itself into my brain and refused to leave. There are multiple days where I'm just sitting there, I'll turn the music off in the car, and I'm just thinking about passages in the book, about lines that have been conjured up in this book, and thinking of just how great McCarthy is as a writer. And even though some people sort of wrote him off a little bit from the 90s onwards, saying that his writing style just was not the same, a lot of people say that, you know, Suttree and Blood Meridian, that 6-year gap there from 79 to 85 is like the greatest double feature of a book amongst the greatest writers in history. It really pained me not to put Suttree on this list in these videos because it's my personal favorite. But in terms of actual best books, it's probably going to go to Blood Meridian. Chances are those of you who are watching this video already know much more about it. And it is a controversial pick because I know there are plenty of people out there who despise it to all to hell. And I can understand why, but I just think it's brilliant, and it does deserve a reread. And even though it's only, well, my edition I think is only about 330 pages, it's 330 pages that packs a punch, a huge punch. Reading these 330 pages is like reading a 1,000 page book. When you're done with it, you sort of just sit back and go, "Oh wow!" It's like you condensed 3 lines into 1 line for every single line throughout the book, and there's not a single wasted moment, not a single wasted space. There are passages where you sort of have to read through and through and through of them, trudging through the desert, but it's there for a reason. Everything is there in this book for a reason, and it's got the whole mythology of the American West, which I adhere to quite a lot. I'm a huge fan of sort of, I guess you call it, anti-Western novels. Other books I place in that category would be The Revenant and Butcher's Crossing by John Williams, but this one takes the cake. So, best book for me of 2016 is Blood Meridian, runner-up For Whom the Bell Tolls. Moving on to 2017. Now, 2017 and 2018 was the big years for me. I think I read a combined total of about 80 or so plus books in those 2 years, which isn't many books compared to most people out there who can read 100 in a year. But I'm hesitant when I think of those type of people, because I'm thinking, well, who the hell reads 100 books a year and is able to remember every single thing from that book? I like to take my time with books, and I like to process them afterwards and research them. And it was really hard picking an honorable mention and a top book of that year, because there were so many to choose from. But honorable mention, I mentioned it just then, Butcher's Crossing, John Williams. Very underappreciated, still underappreciated to this day as an author. Most people who know John Williams, not related to the composer, of course, know him from Stoner, which I have not yet read, which some people out there, including some of you who have watched this channel and have recommended to me in the Recommend Me Some Books video, have said, read Stoner. And I want to, because I have all three of his main books. I think he had one that he published before the 3, but I don't think he likes to talk much about it or spoke much about it because he's dead, obviously. But Butcher's Crossing is a brilliant, I guess you'd call it, anti-Western book. It's got a fine beginning and a fine first third and a fine last third. They're okay. It's decent writing, but it's that middle section where this party goes off into the mountains, finds this valley that is engulfed by mountains all around, and then proceed to push through the valley, slaughtering anything in sight. All these buffalo, just slaughtering them. These bisons, slaughtering them. And as you're walking through, it details all these dead corpses behind them. And I don't know if there's some sort of allegorical element to it or metaphorical element to it with regards to the idea of genocide of Native Americans. Probably is. I didn't read into it that much. It was my first reading, and to this day, my only reading of this book. But that middle section really packed a punch for me. Absolutely brilliant. Best book of 2017. This was a tough one, but I'm going to go with a non-fiction book, and it's The Big Short. Yeah, by Michael Lewis. Scared the hell out of me. It's a damn fine piece of writing, and from what I understand, I think the author's name is Michael Lewis. He's one of the best non-fiction writers out there. He also wrote Moneyball, and he did a recent one, I think a few years back, called The Premonition, which talks about the whole COVID situation. But The Big Short, it can be confusing if you look too much into the details. I actually think the movie did a pretty great job of explaining it by use of celebrity cameos. And there were plenty of times in the book where I had to pause and research. So the book, for example, would take, say, 7 or 8 hours to read. I guess in my estimation, it took me about 16 hours, because I'd read a section, then I'd listen to like an hour of explanation on certain things like CDOs and all that crap and about the mortgage crisis, and then go back and read the book. And it's through these supplementary materials that it made me realize just how great a book The Big Short is. It also sort of paves a way for you to understand these really interesting, eccentric characters that are in the book, that predicted it, saw it coming, and I guess profited off it. You can make of that what you will, whether or not they're heroes or villains about the whole thing. But it's a damn fine read and a great book, and I think it's the best book I read in 2017. Moving on to 2018, the other big year for reading for me. I sort of moved my way from these sort of medium-sized books, small novellas, to the bigger, chunkier books, the ones that took me quite a while to read. And these two are no exception. These two took me quite a long time. One took a massive amount of time. But I think they're worth it. Honorable mention for me, Catch-22, Joseph Heller. Wonderful Folio Society edition there. Beautiful, beautiful book. Unfortunately, the covers got ruined in a recent house flood that I had, of which I also had to chuck out, I think, 62 books total, because it just so happened that the day prior I was unloading all the bookshelves so I could put some new ones in. And yeah, when I came back from work, the whole first floor of the house was flooded, so they're all ruined. That was an absolute waste. I'm not happy about it, but this one survived. And what I found really fascinating was, while the first third of it is absolutely hilarious, and I guess you could say complicated, although subsequent rereadings I was able to piece it together a lot more quickly and was able to go off the flow with it. What I found was that it gets incredibly dark by the end. Extraordinarily transcendentally dark. There are some certainly big moments in this book where I sort of had to put it down and go, whew. And I think it does really well in using up the humor to cover up the evilness of the situation. That had to be the only reason the humor was in the book, was to just help balance it out a bit. But you can see it sort of as like an 80-20 split in the beginning, first third, in terms of humor and darkness, and then it sort of shifts towards the end there. There's still humor littered throughout the final third, but it's, when you really, really think about it, especially with certain side characters such as Milo Minderbinder and what happens with his character as he goes on to establish his own sort of form of capitalism in a way. I think there's a lot of evil in the book, but from many viewers, from many videos out there that I've seen and reviews that I've seen, a lot of them just seem to say that, oh, it's a really funny book that had a confusing first third. So I don't know if I'm looking too deeply into it or what, but it made an impact on me, and I do plan on rereading it. So honorable mention is Catch-22, and the big boy, probably the biggest book I've ever read. Very controversial. There are plenty of people out there who hate it, but I'm sorry, I love it. Infinite Jest, David Foster Wallace. Read it twice, and I got a part way through it last year or the year before, but yeah, I gotta get back to that. It's actually not a hard book to read. I'm in the minority, I guess, when I come to that. It's not a hard book to read. It's just that it takes effort. If you put the effort in, if you push back as hard as it's pushing against you, you will find a balance, a mean, and you'll just flow through the book quite easily. Yes, some of the interconnecting stories may put you off, but in the end, the way to think about it is that this book is technically only 70% done, because it was initially something like 1,400 pages, and he cut basically a whole book out of this book. So what you're looking at is like 70%, and the rest of it, as David Foster Wallace put, is sort of off the corner of the top right-hand side of the frame. You sort of just have to piece it together yourself. And that was the beauty of it. The first time I read it was just to get the experience. Second time I read it was as a more intellectual thought process behind it. And it was through that second reading that I was able to see the dotted points, see where he was leading me. He doesn't take you all the way. He doesn't spoon feed you, but he gives you just enough for you to plot it out yourself. And there are plenty of moments in this book where, again, humor and sadness and darkness sort of balance each other out in huge portions. In particular, to do with the drug house. I think it's called the Enid Drug House, just south of the Tennis Academy. My favorite parts of the book are actually take place in there, not the academy itself. Wonderful stuff, wonderful characters. Definitely a controversial book, but it will stick with me to the end of time. Infinite Jest, David Foster Wallace. Moving on to 2019. Now, this year and the subsequent 2 years that followed that, I had a massive lull in reading. It dropped from about 40 books a year down to about 12 to 15 books a year. And that was due to some sort of personal health issues that I was having at the time, and also the workload that I was having to do. I was working 12-hour shifts, sometimes 7 days a week, so I just could not get any reading done in that time. But there were 2 books in 2019, and it was very easy to pick these books because a lot of the other ones were just absolute crap, and I won't even bother mentioning what they were. But 2 were shining lights for me. One that I read at the tail end of 2019, and one that I read at the very start. The very first book of 2019 that I read, and thoroughly enjoyed it from what I remember, was Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I don't think it's a great book, but it's a damn entertaining one, and it does say a lot about the mental health institutions of the time. And there's this whole sort of dynamic about the idea of, I think free will was a big portion of it, and the fact that the book takes place within the head of the, I guess you can call it mostly mute Native American, the tall guy in the movie who always holds a broom, sort of spoken through his eyes, which really took me by surprise, especially considering I love the movie and was not expecting that at all. There is something to do with the idea of power dynamics in this book, particularly between the main character and Nurse Ratched. Seeing them come to blows. There is a lot going on in this book, but because it was only a first time read for me, it's only a surface level read for me, so I wasn't able to dig deep into it. And I do hope one day to go back through this book and to also do just researching on the time period that it takes place in, just to get a bit more context out of it. I haven't read anything more by Ken Kesey, but as it stands, I was quite thoroughly entertained by this book. But the big one, the one that I ended up reading at the tail end of the year. Now, if you thought Infinite Jest was damn controversial, and I can't wait to see what you think about this one. Yeah, my best book of 2019, Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon. This book took me 2 months to read. I was reading it walking to and from work every day, and I needed companion books to read it. I had, that famous like second edition companion book, the one with the picture of like the banana peel, which gave you like a page by page analysis of it. But I also had this audio book, which is about an hour and a half long, which doesn't give like plot points away or anything like that, but rather it gives you a basic analysis of all the different characters and their placement in the book, just to help you sort of comprehend what you're reading and to sort of ease you into it a little bit more. I found those to be quite helpful in the reading of the book. And once again, just like Infinite Jest, it's not a complicated read. You just have to work just a little bit harder, and go into it with a bit of an open mind, preferably a bit of a historical context, and just remember that there is no one out there like Thomas Pynchon. What you probably should be doing is reading some of his shorter books before getting into Gravity's Rainbow if you're thinking about trying it. A lot of people will point you towards it, Crying of Lot 49, but if I'm being perfectly honest, I think that's his worst book by a large margin. I would be more inclined to point you towards Vineland or Inherent Vice. Yeah, those are two pretty damn good books. In fact, I consider Vineland to be highly underappreciated. Not many people talk about it enough, and they should. I think there's an element of true sadness in that book there, particularly the way the whole hippie dynamic and Reagan era basically demolished that for the subsequent generations that came. Takes place like in the 60s and the 80s. There is some sadness in that book there, but there's sadness in this book here, particularly in the middle section involving the scientist. It's like a 40-page section involving the scientist who's developing the stuff for the Nazis, and he has these like sojourns with this supposed daughter of his, although whether or not he's his daughter or not is up for debate. But at the end of that middle section, in this little tiny short story in this huge book, he sort of takes a walk through the concentration camp. And this is like one of the few times where you actually get to see the horrors of the war explained through Pynchon's eyes. Otherwise, most of this is just like a massive like Looney Tunes / Monty Python adventures on the outskirts of the war. You don't actually see what's going on in the war, but these are the sort of things that are happening while the war is on. This takes place towards the latter end of the war, and in fact, sometime after it as well. But if you can get through some of the disgusting elements of it, and there are parts of this book, obviously, for reasons why I didn't win the Pulitzer Prize that year, if you can get past that and just read it and try your best to interpret it without losing your mind over it, make of that what you will find something of value in this book. And even those who finish the book, some people have finished this book, read the whole thing, gave it like 1 star or 0 stars, and says it's shit, the whole thing's bad. And I'm thinking to them, well, why did you finish it then? Obviously, there must have been something. There must have been even just a little passage in this book here, which must have piqued your interest for you to just keep on reading it. For me, it's the best book of 2019, and there were plenty of passages that I loved. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. But I adhere to challenging reads, and I guess what I consider challenging, some people wouldn't, and what I consider not challenging, some people would consider challenging. So a bit of vice versa there. This is just personal opinions, preferably. The only thing that really threw me off was the the cycle of the plot structure of the book. That sort of, when I got to that, I was like, oh, okay, wait, what's going on here? Do I need to reread it? But I think I figured out about 80% of the book. I'm pretty sure I figured out about 80% of it, and I look forward to rereading it again in the future. Obviously, I'll need to set some time apart for it because it's such a massive fucking book, but yeah. Moving on to 2020, I'm just going to speed through this one because there are like 5 honorable mentions, because there was like a 2-month period where I was reading banger after banger after banger of books, and I just could not decide which was the best book of the year. I eventually had to go off one and honorable mention the rest. So we got Zero by Steve Erickson, which is, Zeroville by Steve Erickson, which is sort of like this wonderful, wonderful display of cinema captured in the sort of historical fictional context of this guy named Vicar, and his little adventures through Hollywood and his subsequent pathway into becoming an editor. For a cinephile like me, it was absolutely wonderful. Great book. Stone Junction, Jim Dodge, completely underappreciated, underread. It needs to be read. I don't know much about it. I just picked it up because it has an introduction by Thomas Pynchon, and when you read it, especially the first 100 pages, you'll realize why. Very mystical. There's a bit of a magical element to it, but it's a damn lot of fun. J.G. Ballard's best book, High Rise. It was between this and Crash, and I guess even Concrete Island. But I'm going to go with High Rise. High Rise was the one for me where I finished it and I liked it. But then as the weeks went by, I reflected on it and realized just how much of a masterpiece it really is. Brilliant, brilliant book. It's an okay movie as well. Joan Didion, The White Album, the book that got me into Joan Didion. I've been reading a lot of her work since and have, for the most part, loved it. I didn't like her fictional book, Played as It Lays, but I guess I'm in the minority there because a lot of people I respect actually love that book. I'm going to get to Slouching Towards Bethlehem because apparently a lot of people say that one's even better than The White Album. And then we've also got The Minotaur Takes a Cigarette Break, another underappreciated, underread book. Probably even more underread than Stone Junction. It's an absolutely wonderful... I read this in one afternoon, just sitting on the couch, got home from work at about 3 p.m, and I read it through till 10 p.m, and it's just wonderful. There is an element of sadness there involved in this Minotaur who escaped from Greece and is working as a line chef in the south, and no one seems to be batting an eye about it. It is as it is. It just happened. But there's an element of sadness in this Minotaur's head and the way he lives. It's almost an element of sort of coming to terms with escaping the past, which anyone can relate to. It's actually a very melancholic book, but it's got humor in there as well. Wonderful, wonderful read. Highly recommended. Minotaur Takes a Cigarette Break. But the best book of 2020, another Folio Society edition, Confederacy of Dunces. First time I read this, I liked it, but I sort of wrote it off saying, I don't know. But again, it's one where I kept thinking and thinking and thinking about it. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized just how brilliant it is. It's probably up there with Catch-20. No, screw that. Confederate Dunces is probably the funniest book I've ever read. There were lots of passages that had me howling with laughter. And I guess it probably wouldn't be written today because there's certain elements of, I guess, call it racism or just certain parts of this book which would be anti towards the woke society of the way things are going in the world today. But as a product of its time, it's a wonderful read, and I would love to see a film adaptation one day of this thing, and I do plan on rereading it. I have so many fond memories of this reading of A Confederacy of Dunces, and obviously by buying the Folio Society edition, it's pretty evident that I've fallen in love with this book quite a lot. A fantastic read, highly recommended. 2021, another year I barely read any books, probably 10 or 12 max. Unfortunately, I've got no books to show because these two books were basically killed off in the flood. But runner-up is Roadside Picnic, a Russian book, very highly philosophical. It is technically a sci-fi, but I appreciated it more for its philosophical endeavors than for the actual going into the zone to get to the end. Although it gets very psychedelic in that last section. My favorite section actually doesn't take place in the zone. It takes place in a bar between a scientist and the main character. The conversation they have is absolutely fantastic, and I'm a sucker for conversations between two characters. That just really gets me going. Fantastic book, Roadside Picnic. Probably the best sci-fi book I've ever read. I haven't read Solaris yet, but I'm planning on getting around to it. My best book of 2021 was Luna Park by Bret Easton Ellis. I know I'm definitely a minority when I say this here. I think it's his best book. Better than American Psycho, better than Lesson Zero, better than The Rules of Attraction, better than Imperial Bedrooms. And I can't say it's better than Glamorama because I haven't read Glamorama. But what I liked most about Luna Park was there was an element of true emotion in this book that was somewhat lacking from his previous works, which is evident, which is understandable because the books that he was writing previous to that were not based purely on emotion. They were based on sort of this cold emotion that they made the protagonists feel, which I understand. But what I found in Luna Park, especially even in the first 30 pages when I read it, I sort of read the first 30 pages, which is sort of like a meta history of Bret Easton Ellis' life, and I'm like, oh wow, okay, he's really doing something different here. And then it turns into like a weird ghost story which interlocks with some characters from American Psycho, and it builds to this really emotional ending between Bret and another character. I can't remember if it's a son or a daughter or his father that he has a conversation with, a very small conversation at the end of the book in a diner of all places. I might be misremembering, but that almost brought a tear to my eye. I saw humanism in Bret with this book, Luna Park, something I'd not seen before, and it made me appreciate his work all the more. I have not read The Shards yet. Definitely his biggest book by a long mile, but I do plan on getting around to it. Best book of 2021, Luna Park. Moving on to 2022, last year. Honourable mention has to go to the final book by Cormac McCarthy. It's Stella Maris. Yeah. I was completely enthralled with this one, and The Passenger as well. Don't get me wrong, The Passenger is not a bad book. It's a great book, But there was something about Stella Maris, and again, this reiteration of conversations between two characters. I was enthralled with what she had to say. There was just this level of intellectualism, but also inner sadness that was creeping its way through as the book went along. And even though it was quite a short book, it was just the right length for you to really get the emotion and the smarts of Alicia Weston. What I want to do is I want to reread both the Passenger and Stella Maris, but I want to read it in reverse order. I want to read Stella Maris first and then read the Passenger, just to see if that final 30 pages of the Passenger hits harder on an emotional level. What I want to see is whether or not reading Stella Maris first will have a higher impact than the other way around. I think it will, but that's just a personal theory of mine. They're marvelous works, and they're great on their own, but they sort of work in conjunction with each other. I really wish there was a way that the editor could have compounded these two books into one massive volume. But given the writing structure of Stella Maris and with The Passenger, where every single chapter began with a section of Alicia Weston and the thalidomide kid, I understand that it would have been just an absolute nightmare to be able to put the two together. That might be the reason why it took so long to come out. I'm not entirely sure. But on their own, they're damn great books, and I don't think they get the love they deserve. They seem to have almost in a way came and went. They were a literary event, but no one's talking about them. They didn't win any awards. I wonder if it's going to be that thing where 10 years from now, people do sort of like a retrospective of McCarthy and sort of come up with the idea of, oh, we got it wrong. Stella Maris and The Passenger are actually brilliant works, which they should be. But I prefer Stella Maris. Stella Maris is the honorable mention of the year. Number one, and it's the book that everyone's reading at the moment because it's the movie that everyone's talking at the moment. American Prometheus, The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer. Massive book. Took me 10 days to read it because I just pummeled through it. A lot of information in there, a lot to comprehend, a lot to contain, but keep in mind that it's a biographical book. It's not delving into the sciences too much. It's giving you like a one-on-one on type thing. If you're interested in the idea of the makings of the atomic bomb, there's an actual book out there called The Making of the Atomic Bomb. I haven't read it, but I do plan on reading it. This book here purely focuses on the man himself, Oppenheimer. First third of it is about his university years and his teachings in California and his meetings of Gene Tatlock and his eventual wife. Then the second third is about Los Alamos, and then the final third is the hearings and what prevailed from there. So it's sort of like a thriller split into three sections, and the movie did a damn good job of translating it. I was really worried because when the movie was first announced, I said to my roommate, well, either it's going to be 3 hours long or it's going to have a shitload of montages, and it's 3 hours long and it has a lot of montages, so it worked in its favor. I think it's a damn fine film. American Prometheus is my favorite book of last year. Hugely entertained by it. Great read, highly recommended. Probably my favorite non-fiction book that I've read in this century, maybe behind The Big Short. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not going to do my favorite books from this year because it's still going on, but at the moment it's sort of a tie between Shisaku Endo's Silence and Dennis Johnson's Train Dreams. Two wonderful books. But yeah, that just sort of gives you an idea of my reading through the years. Let me know how your reading progression has gone, and if there's any books here that you agree or disagree with, let me know below and we'll chat about it. Thanks very much. See you in the next one. Bye.